Greetings and thank you for coming in and joining in and watching this conversation again. It's a pleasure to be having this engagement, but also sharing my reflections and personal experiences with you. So, today I'm going to talk about the diaspora dilemma, planning your return and reintegration journey. And the essence of this conversation is that we live in different sides of the world and different expectations, and our perspectives are also will always be convoluted and depending on what we perceive the other side to be or what this side where we are is at that point in time. And the normal conversation and actually the normal perception by most Kenyans and most Africans is when you go to the Western world, you're going to better opportunities and better prospects, and therefore you'll have a better life. It is true in some way, but it might also not be true in other ways. And the reason for this is when people talk about the Western world and you're looking at maybe, for example, you have a job and you have a salary. When you cost it and compare it with the benchmarks in Kenya, you'd be like, okay, I'm making lots of money. I'd rather go there. What you don't factor is the cost of living. But that is not the context of this conversation. Today, I'm going to talk about how do you plan your return and reintegration journey. And this is mostly for the diaspora as well, looking at coming back home and seeing what the future would host for them if they're coming back home and they actually made up their minds on that. This is not an easy decision and an easy conversation that people would have. And the essence of it is oftentimes people will say, I want to come back home, but they never get to make the decision and actually make the move. Reason being, there's always the expectation back home in some context. And people, by the virtue that you've already been seen to be in the Ukomaju, the context is you're having a better life, you're having better prospects. So why would you come back home in Kenya and suffer with us? Why would you do that? And that is a key challenge that actually might hold people back from a socio-emotional standpoint. But the reality of it is you have to make your own decision and you have to structure it guided by some fundamentals. And those are the foundations of what you need to consider when you're thinking of coming back home. For me, I stayed in the UK for 1 year or so. Then after the 1 year that I finished, I decided to come back home. That was involving even previous other travels and related engagements, mostly for work-related commitments. But in coming back home, I would say I'm glad that I came back home, but I'm also clear in terms of what I want to do back home and how I want to make that journey to work for me. But at the same time, I've had conversations with people who are contemplating coming back home. And the question is, how do you reintegrate? How do you shape your career? How do you shape your life and all that stuff? And there's so many things that would come into perspective. And I would say that is why I want to share this conversation with you. Because if you are a diaspora who is thinking of coming back home, it might be right, it might be wrong, but with making that decision, you need to get some guidance or some guardrails to hold on and say, okay, if I'm going to make this, how does it in fact affect this aspect of my life, and how does it affect the other? So the first thing is, if you are contemplating coming back home, ask yourself, why are you considering that option of coming back home or staying abroad? Whichever way, you have to make a decision, and it has to be founded by some reason, and that reason is what you need to know. So for me, having that clear is important for you. Once you consider those options on why you want to come home and looking at your prospects where you are, look at it from a financial standpoint, because as an adult, you have financial obligations on how you're going to live your life and what that would entail for you. So look at your finances. Two, look at your family commitments and family obligations as well. And that could be your own nucleus family if you're married or in a relationship with somebody, or it could be the extended family in terms of your parents, your siblings, your relatives that you have an obligation to support if you have that in terms of the context where you're operating. So you need to look at that as well. And then when you look at it from a professional standpoint, ask yourself, what is your career at the moment? What are you doing there? And what would that ecosystem look like when you're integrating back home and getting to engage? And in that context and in that understanding, for me, one of the key things that I would say has been a good opportunity for me and actually an enabler is that when I transitioned for my studies, I maintained my networks and my relationships back home. So the conversations kept going from a social standpoint, but also from a professional standpoint. And that is was by being part of the professional association, part of the industry groups. So then you could know what's happening and what's moving. Not everybody has that privilege and that luxury. So there's also a difference in that. But also for me, it was only 1 year. So with the 1 year timeline, you still keep in touch with people who you've been working with and engaging with. So you can have to know what are the changes and what's coming up new in that ecosystem. So maintaining those networks and those relationships are important if you're just in that process of moving and all that, but also being clear on what are the different fundamentals. So the first thing is know why. The second thing is do an evaluation of your different pillars and facets of your life that would be impacted, and ask yourself, how do you plan to mitigate them? Education for your children if you have children, your own personal professional growth, your finances, how are you structuring them and all that, and then what are you going back to. And then look at something that I think most of us don't consider as much, is the socio-emotional and psychological aspect of life, of how the transition would be for you. Last week I watched and read this story about this lady Irene Tenya, and it was a painful story. I don't say that I know her as much, but I've read the story about what people are saying online and all the claims that are being made and all. It is a struggle coming back, and especially when you have an expectation that you had made it somewhere and therefore you expect the same success when you come back home. It might happen, it might not happen, but the question is, what social and socio-emotional support structures do you have available for you to help you carve out your path for whatever it is that you intend to do? I think that is an important conversation that you need to factor in. Ultimately, when you've considered all those, I would say the next move, and this is now linked to a conversation that I recently had with a colleague of mine who is working in the UK but is considering coming back, working in clinical pharmacy practice in the NHS as a clinical specialist in whatever her field of work is, mostly in chronic diseases and aging conditions. And I would say, one, look at what you're doing at the moment and ask yourself, how transferable are the skills and the competencies that you have? Because of diversities and disparities in the healthcare system architecture, you know that not everything, for example, if you're dealing with aging conditions and all that in the US, not the same are in Kenya. And even if they do exist in Kenya, how many people can pay for them? Geriatric care, that is. How many people can pay for them, and how substantial would that market pool be for you if you're going to come in? And how do you even define that domain or practice for yourself? That's going to be a challenge. But it doesn't mean that you leave it to the point when you come back. You can start having conversation, and most of the times when I share people, I tell them, build a platform and be a thought leader in the space that you're doing your work. So you're already an expert in whatever you're doing, you're practicing somewhere, engage with the professional networks, come share a session, a webinar, talk about what's happening, maybe review some of the policy documents that are coming in. What do you do about it? How do you shape it up? Because then you will be playing to your advantage, to your core strength. Then as you're playing to your core strength, you're also using it to build relationships and build connections with people back home, so you can know who to talk to, when to talk to them, and how to engage with them in that ecosystem, because you are an outsider but also an insider at the same time. So because at the Diaspora you have those different nuances that you must understand. As you are engaging, I think one of the problem that I noted is some people do invest home, and you're investing when you're away, and you're investing in things that you don't understand as much. Ultimately, you lose the money, because the first perception is you already have a lot of money, you're abroad. So then, however much the loss might be incurred, you don't feel it as much. That is the perception. So you be clear about what you want to do, and also come in a staggered approach. And staggered is, don't deploy all your resources and lose them, but also be in a staggered approach in the sense that you take time to evaluate and understand the markets, understand the relationships, build the networks that you need to have. And beyond that, get to a point where you are comfortable in your skin and you have your own internal support system, where things, whether they work out or not in the shortest time that you had hoped for, it doesn't affect you. Don't look at the public perception that, oh, these guys from abroad, they should be succeeding and all that. It won't work for you, because then ultimately the pressures keep piling. You are exposing yourself to external additional mental strains and all that. So you need to have a robust social support system, but you also have to build the fortitude to be resilient enough to deal with these challenges when they do happen for you. It's very, very important, and these things will happen whether you like it or not. It is the reality of life, and it is the truth of what we have to contend with when coming back home. Ultimately, keep the move and keep consistent and solid in whatever you're pursuing. Doesn't mean you kill your relationship where you're coming from. If, for example, you're practicing in the UK, in the US, whatever it is, when you're coming back, first of all, plan the journey and actually have things figured out and have structures before you make the actual move. But then when you make the move, maintain relationships on both sides, not as a fallback plan, but to ensure that in case you have those dynamics, you have people who can understand the context of the challenges that you're dealing with. I do have calls with some of my friends who are still back in the UK. And the conversation is normally from a point of, okay, how has the dynamics been for me? What are the dynamics on that other end? How are they contending with them? And what would be their perception on how to deal with this? Sometimes it's not because they've experienced it, but because they understand your circumstances. They understand the context of what you're dealing with. Because sometimes if you don't have the people who understand what you're dealing with, they'll be wondering, okay, why are you complaining even? Because you've had it all given to you. That is not the truth. but you have to start walking the journey together. For those who are keen on making the move, I would wish you all the best. If you're keen on having a conversation with me just to reflect and see, okay, what are you doing? What are you hoping to do? And what would the journey coming back into the continent and integrating look like for you? I'll be more than glad to engage and support where I can through the work that I'm doing, but also through from a personal standpoint, because I think I understand the difficulties and the challenges in making the transition. Let us not lose diasporas who are coming back home with a commitment to supporting the country, but also most importantly, for those who are leaving the country, understand that there will be different dynamics of what you're going to deal with in those other countries. Talk to people before you go, if you want to go. Thank you and have a good one. For those who enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the channel, share it with somebody who might find value out of it, and let's build a community of people who help each other and aspire for greatness all together. Thank you and have a good one.